So earlier today, I spoke with someone who was Donald Trump's right-hand man for more than a year, his former chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney. We discussed the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago, if Donald Trump may have had a sinister intent in keeping those documents there, and whether Trump still has his vote. And what he told me was really surprising. Mr. Mulvaney, thanks so much for joining us. I wanted to ask you your impressions out of the gate. You were President Trump's chief of staff for 15 months. What's your read on everything that's happened with the search and seizure, the documents found, and the political fallout?
Yeah, Ashleigh, thanks for having me. Listen, if the FBI doesn't find a cold body or a smoking gun, then I think this will go down as one of the greatest overreaches in law enforcement history. You don't get to go into a former president's house because of just technical document violations. There has to be something really serious there. I can't imagine what that might be. I can't imagine how retaining those documents would benefit former President Trump. So there's a bunch of things I don't understand at this point yet. I would like to give the Department of Justice and the FBI the benefit of the doubt, but over the course of the last 5, 6, 7 years, they've clearly come down against Republicans too many times for me to give them that benefit of the doubt. So I fully recognize that there may be something there, and the Department of Justice may be doing the exact right thing. But I think they've got a fairly high burden to meet to show they were justified in going to Mar-a-Lago where the president lives.
So let's talk about that burden. If, in fact, TSSCI documents, the highest classification of documents, the kind of documents that the former director of the FBI, Andrew McCabe, says he wasn't even allowed to have at his house, and just to have a level below that in secret documents, to work at those at home, the government had to build a special facility at his home to have those. So what would that burden be? What bar would it be for you to make the search and seizure legitimate?
Certainly, the mishandling of documents is a serious issue. There's no question about that. The question is whether or not it was done with intent and whether or not the documents could actually hurt the United States. They might do that, and they might be able to show the president took them on purpose for the purpose of benefiting himself. I think anything is possible in this world. There's no question about it. But I honestly think there's a better possibility that the documents were included inadvertently and the president didn't know he was there. Again, I could be wrong. I'd like to know what the Department of Justice thought it was going to look for when they filed the affidavit with the court down in Florida. They submitted a piece of paper that says, here's what we think has happened, here's what we think is there, and here's why it's so important that we get in right away, that we don't send a subpoena, we actually send a team to go and pull these things out. I'd like to know why the Department of Justice thought that there was an emergency here, especially given the fact the president was in New Jersey all of this time. So there's a lot of questions. Are you supposed to have top secret SCI documentation at home? Absolutely not. Is it a problem? Yes. Is it the kind of thing by itself that justifies an invasion of a former president's home? Again, that's where I'm still wondering. I want to know what they found, and I also want to know what they thought they were going to find.
So perhaps just the suspicion that those documents would be there. I hear what you're saying. But if the suspicion was then borne out by a source who confirmed those documents were there, and the DOJ was met with intransigence from former President Trump and his team, as well as a letter that we're learning was signed by an attorney on Donald Trump's team, suggesting there were no longer any classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, nothing to see here. Does that change the metric in terms of why the DOJ would then, after 2 subpoenas, come in and do this search and seizure?
Maybe. I mean, certainly if they make the case that the president was being non-cooperative, I've not heard that yet. I have seen the same reporting you have about the letter that was sent by one of the attorneys. It raises a question, I suppose. One of the questions we'll have to answer is, did the FBI see that document when they were there in June? People seem to forget the FBI was actually at Mar-a-Lago pursuant to a subpoena in June and looked through documents. Did they not see it? Were they not shown it? Did they see it and determine that it wasn't going to be that big of a deal? Keep in mind, one of the things I think we all know and agree on at this point is that after that June visit, the FBI sent the president a letter and said, please put another lock on the door. Okay, that's great. Number one, it sounds like the president complied with that. Number two, if the FBI knew there was TSSCI that stuff there in June, putting a lock on the doors that doesn't solve that problem. They should have taken it at the time. So there's still a lot of questions about whether or not everything was seen. or shown? Was it hidden? I don't know. But it comes back to this. Was there willful intent? These are criminal statutes we're talking about. This is the stuff that you willfully undertake. It's stuff that you're doing in order to either benefit yourself or harm the United States of America. That's part of the Espionage Act. They're going to have to show that specific intent, not just the president took 15 boxes of documents, that the FBI went through it and missed one, and there was a TSSCI document in there. Again, more questions than answers at this time. I'm one of the folks who, again, is trying to wait to see about real evidence before I jump to any conclusions.
Sure. And, as the chief of staff, it's arguable that, you know the president best. You're the closest to him in the White House. You can know that just from watching The West Wing. But do you personally, Mr. Mulvaney, think that the former president that from your interactions with him could be capable of having such intent or perhaps such ill will? You mentioned before, I'm not sure if he did this inadvertently or if he had some, sinister intent. Do you think he's capable of some kind of sinister intent?
Yeah, I will answer your question. Never having watched The West Wing, I suppose that puts me at a disadvantage. Look, I have a basic principle about Washington, D.C., and it's that don't ever assume a conspiracy where simple incompetence will explain things. Is it possible that the President of the United States took a document that he knew would be of benefit to a foreign nation and somehow sold it to them to make money for himself? Yeah, I guess that's possible. It's possible for anybody to do that. Is it more likely that they walked out with a bunch of documents and in there was a document they should not have had? I think that's probably more likely. I'm not completely dismissing the possibility that there's something underhanded here. We're all human beings, and maybe the president saw something that he thought could advantage him or disadvantage one of his enemies. But what I know about Donald Trump makes me more likely to think that it was just not paying attention to the details and walking out with a bunch of stuff. And it sat in the basement. I think it sat in the basement. That's all the evidence we have. There doesn't seem to be any evidence he was showing it to guests at Mar-a-Lago. Then it sat there for 15 months. Again, a lot of this is still guesswork. But as between the president getting the benefit of the doubt and the DOJ getting the president the doubt, and I've been critical of the president where I thought he deserved it, but I think right now the former president of the United States wins on the benefit of the doubt, and it's up to the DOJ to prove that this was a legitimate purpose to this invasion of the president's home.
So, to that point, we have inside reporting from our Brian Enton, who has an impeccable FBI source who said it wasn't a basement. It was actually a room off of a hallway that led to the pool. So it was even closer to the semi-public nature of Mar-a-Lago, which is extraordinarily distressing, inside the distressing aspect of it being, outside of a skiff, a protected room. But to that end, if you watch the right-wing media channels, they will say this was unprecedented and unnecessary. They should never have come in and just raided a president. And if you watch the left-wing channels, they will say, but there was back and forth and the DOJ was getting nowhere. So where do you see the solution here, knowing the president? I get it, mishandling, a chaotic exit, we've all heard the reports. But in the ensuing efforts to reclaim what they suspected was there, the DOJ said, we tried. We tried with meetings. We tried with 2 subpoenas. We were promised. We padlocked, and then ultimately had no other choice. Where do you see the left and the right not getting this?
It's a really good question. I think you asked, what's the solution? And I actually think there is one here. It's an extraordinary step, but give the right wing credit on this one. This is unprecedented. We don't know if it's unnecessary, but certainly the FBI has never raided a former president's home before. So that part is unprecedented. So the ordinary course of business and how the DOJ goes about their business probably goes out the window here. And the reason I say that is because the DOJ has a piece of information that they haven't shared yet. And that's the affidavit that they had to give to the judge down in South Florida in order to get the search warrant. That affidavit had to say what crimes they thought the DOJ thought had been committed, what evidence they thought was at Mar-a-Lago and why they thought it was there, and why it was so imminent and so important that they get it right away, that it was either going to be destroyed or was going to be disappeared or was going to be shown to people who are not supposed to see it. That affidavit would solve a lot of these questions. It would also put a lot of this sort of fictionalizing on both the right and the left to bed. You got folks on the left saying, oh, they've got the president dead to rights, he's going to jail. And you've got folks on the right saying that this was completely unnecessary and this was a political target. Again, I think the president gets the benefit of the doubt right now. We would hope any American would. You're innocent until proven guilty, but especially under these circumstances. But the DOJ could solve a lot of that by transparency, just saying, look, here's what we gave to the court to justify this search warrant.
I can't wait for that either. As journalists, we all want to get our hands on the affidavit. I'm not holding my breath anytime soon. But this one last question, Mr. Mulvaney, given everything you know so far, and I know you're watching both the left and the right-wing channels, but given everything, as a measured man, a man who's held one of the top offices in the United States as Chief of Staff to the President of the United States, if Donald Trump is the Republican nominee in 2024, would you vote for him?
I've been on record as saying I don't think we need him. I don't. I'm hoping that somebody else runs against him in the primary because I think we can have the same policies without all the baggage. And as much as I respect my former employer, I have difficulties with it, there's no question. In fact, I quit my job over January 6th. He may well be the only Republican who can lose to Joe Biden or to any other Democrat in 2024. Unless there's a dramatic change in the economy, unless the direction of the country changes, you got to think that the Republican is going to go into the 2024 presidential election as the slight favorite. Donald Trump might be the only person who could lose that election. Ron DeSantis could win, Tim Scott could win, Mike Pence could win, Mike Pompeo could win, Nikki Haley could win. The Democrats are weak. And I don't think we should be offering Donald Trump for that reason. And I think it's also a time actually for the next generation to take over anyway. We've got a good bench. We've got younger people. It's time for Donald Trump to sort of go to the sideline, continue to push the policies that made him so popular, redefine my party, but we can have all the policies without the baggage. So I hope he doesn't run. And if he runs, I hope he doesn't win the nomination for Republicans.
If he does, though, I'm just going to push you one more time. If he does, though, and he is the nominee, would you vote for him? Yes or no?
I would have a hard time doing that. I know everybody's vote is secret, and I hate to make it about myself, so I'm not going to dodge your question. I'm not going to answer it directly by saying it would be really hard for me to know what I know about January 6th, sort of, which still bugs me. It does. The same reasons I quit the job are the reasons I would be very, very slow to vote for Donald Trump. Again, I live in South Carolina, so it doesn't make any difference because he's going to win my state if he's the nominee. But on general principles, It would be really tough.
Mick Mulvaney, it's always good to talk to you. I hope you'll be a guest regularly. Thanks for the time.
Thanks, Ashleigh.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.